Hey there. Thanks for tuning in. You ready for another episode of my Bigfoot sighting? Alright then, let's do this.
Seen a bunch of rundown no-horse towns where the church is the backbone, love's in the plow, and the five-string melodies grooving, with the farmland rows where the roots run deep, beyond the noise of the busy streets, where the songs of the South are soothing. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah.
My name's Eric, and last week I was on talking about my experience with a Bigfoot. I talked about two different experiences. First one was of the biggest Bigfoot ever. And since I talked to Vic, I started listening to more of his podcasts and got thinking to myself that maybe I should go back out there and check out that woods and, into that spot where I haven't been since and see if there's been any activity out that way. This time, though, I ended up taking my younger brother, Sean, with me, and I picked him up in the morning. But before I picked him up, I had stopped at the local grocery store and picked up a sack of apples and a can of peanut butter from the other Bigfoot podcasts that I had heard. Apparently, these creatures enjoy that type of gift, and I thought, well, couldn't hurt. So I went ahead and grabbed that and swung by to pick up my younger brother. And by the time I got him and made it out to the spot I was going to park, it was about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And, I talked to him beforehand and told him, why I was going out there. And I told him before about my Bigfoot experiences, and he was kind of eager because he'd never seen anything like that. And I told him, I says, well, chances are we probably won't see anything. It'll just be a good time for us to do some brotherly bonding and go out and hang out in the woods and enjoy nature, go for a little nature hike. So he was all good with that. And we got there and jumped out the truck and got the apples and the peanut butter and put them in my pack. And we started hiking down the fence line, got about halfway down the fence line. And I thought, it's middle of the day. We might as well just cut across this cornfield. It's been picked and it'll get us closer to the woods. We'll cut off a good 20 minutes of our time. So we turned to the left and started walking towards the woods, the one corner where I always go in at. And, it took us a good, 10 minutes to cut across the field. So it saved us a little bit of time. And we got there to the corner where the hayfield was and walked up in. And right there, as soon as we entered the woods, first thing I did, is I turned to my left and I looked in the woods and I started scanning the woods and scanning up in the trees and scanning down on the ground and kind of looking around. And I looked towards the swamp and over the ridge. And then I glanced down towards where those bowl-shaped areas were that I mentioned before in my previous talk with Vic. And the very first thing I noticed was some type of a creature. It was all black. And it looked to me like it was another Bigfoot. And it was kind of sitting down on its haunches and kind of squatting and kind of digging through the leaves that were all over the forest floor. And I looked behind me and I said to my brother, because he was back behind me, I says, do you see what I'm seeing? And he says, what? And I said, there's a Bigfoot right down there, right where we're going. And he says, oh, let me see. And he tried to walk around me. And as soon as he started walking around me, the leaves started crunching underneath his feet. And it stood straight up and it ran right over the ridge and down into the swamp. And I thought, well, I wish you could have seen it, buddy, but I just seen one. And he's like, well, it might come back. I'm like, all right, well, let's just keep going over towards where we're going to go, because he was right where I was going to leave the apples and the peanut butter. So we start walking, and all of a sudden we got a tree knock. And then a few seconds later, another tree knock. And my brother Sean says, should we answer it back? And I said, well, I don't know, if we should or not. And he says, well, that's what they do on all them TV shows and whatnot. They knock back. So I was like, all right. So I went ahead and found me a nice sized branch, and I went and took one good whack at this walnut tree that I was standing next to, waited a couple seconds, and I whacked her again. And we kind of sat there for a few minutes, didn't hear nothing, and started walking closer towards where I had seen the Bigfoot, or that creature, squatted down. And we got maybe about another 15 yards, and I got another tree knock. Paused for a few seconds, and then heard another one. I says, there it is again. And he says, yeah, do it again. Go ahead and respond. So I went ahead and took my branch and knocked against the nearest tree, waited a few seconds, knocked again. And then there was just dead silence. And we got, about another 20, 30 yards closer towards those bowl-shaped areas. And I didn't see nothing, and he didn't see nothing. And I said, well, look at that over there on the other side of that bowl-shaped area. Doesn't that not look like some type of a tree structure, or some kind of a nest or something like that? And he said, yeah, it could be. And I says, well, I'm going to go and check that out. So I started to walk away from him, and he says, Eric, stop. And I stopped dead in my tracks, and he said, look over there. And I said, over where? And he says, right there by that ridge. Do you see it? And I says, I don't see nothing. He says, walk towards me. So I started walking towards him, and he put his hand back up for me to stop. So I waited, and he motioned for me to come back closer to him, and I start walking towards him. And when I got right up by him, he pointed out exactly where I should be looking, and there was a little dead tree laying right there alongside the ridge. And he said, I just saw one pop its head up 3 times in between the time that I told you to come over here by me. And I says, you got to be kidding me. And he's like, no, there's one right there. So I kind of stood there for a second, and he sat down on a log right there. And, I was hoping to see it, but I didn't see anything. I says, well, I'm glad you at least got to see it. And he's like, yeah, that was awesome, but it might come back, And I said, well, I'm going to walk down here, to them bowl-shaped areas, and I'm going to go take a look at that tree structure. But before I did, I noticed right between me and him, and where that Bigfoot was on the ridge, there was a tree all arched over, and the part where the branches and stuff should be up towards the top of the tree, it was a maple. It was stabbed into the ground. So I says, you know what, I'm going to take a picture of this before I go down there. So I went ahead and took a picture, and I made a note that like maybe 10 feet away from that was another hunter's deer stand. And I thought, that's interesting. I had heard on some of these other podcasts that they mark, where hunters are. And maybe that was some kind of a way to let other Bigfoots know that, there's a hunter in the area and steer clear of that spot or whatever. But, after taking the picture, I went ahead and turned to my left and started traveling down towards that hollowed out spot and where I had seen that first Bigfoot. When I got down there, I had found where something had been moving the leaves back, and it looked like they were pulling up plants, little flowers or something like that, or whatever they are, that were springing up, little plants that were springing up underneath the leaves. They were pulling them up and eating them. So I was looking at that first, and then I thought, that's kind of neat. And I took a few pictures of that. And in the one picture, to me, it looked like there was, a couple fingerprints, or, where its hand had been there. And where the one finger was wider than two of my fingers put together. And I got pretty big hands, but it was definitely wider than two of my fingers. So, I was like, that's kind of neat. I'm glad I got pictures of that. So then I walked over towards that tree structure that was there on the opposite side of the bowl. And to me, it looked like there was a nest there, like something made, kind of like a nest. There was like logs all kind of piled up around it, and branches and whatnot. And I took a picture of that also. But directly to the left of that, there was a log that was laying probably like north and south. And I noticed that there was one spot where the leaves looked like something had been laying there. And I mean, you can make it out in the picture, because I took a picture of this too. And it had to have been at least 8 foot. And it looked like it was laying there with like its legs spread. And you can see the outline of the legs and the body, and where the arms laid next to it. And like it used the log as like a pillow and kind of rested its head on the log. It looks like something like, it looks like a human had lay there, only a really, really big human, like, like at least 8 foot tall. I mean, it's big, but that's the only leaves that were disturbed on that spot. It was just like right where it had been laying. So, I made sure I got a picture of all that. And then, I kind of walked back over after doing that. And I was starting to walk back towards my brother. And I don't know if I told this to Vic when I talked to him earlier about this, but I smelled some scat in the area, and it was pretty stinky. I mean, it was definitely a carnivore scat. Carnivore scat and vegetarian scat smells a lot different. I mean, I've got goats and rabbits and all kinds of other animals over to my place, and this had a definite rotten meat stink to it. It was kind of gross. I didn't actually go looking for exactly where this cat was, but I could smell it. And so I started walking back up towards my brother, and I noticed as I'm walking back up towards him, because he was he would have been to the north of, I would have been walking north up the side of the bowl, and I turned to my left, and I seen something standing about 75 yards away, and it was about 8 foot tall. And it was doing this. I don't know if you've ever seen like toddlers or little kids, kind of like when they dance, when they hear the music, they kind of shift back and forth from like foot to foot, and they like move their head, kind of sway back and forth. Well, that's kind of like what this thing was doing. And it kind of made me smirk a bit, because, that's exactly what it made me think of, as a little kid. And I noticed after a minute or so, it kind of stopped, and then it reached its arm around the tree that it was standing in front of. It was a big beech tree, and it put its hand on the side that was facing me, because it was standing on the other side. And its hand was definitely bigger than mine, but this thing was totally black, just like the one before. And I couldn't make out any facial features, just like I couldn't really make out any facial features on the other one, because it was just so black, so jet black. And I noticed on the other side of the tree, from where it swung its arm around, I noticed there was something smaller, maybe about 4 or 5 foot tall, and it was peeking around that side, and I could see it was another entity or another creature, another Bigfoot, whatever, and it was peeking around that side. So the bigger one was peeking on the one side, and the littler one, or smaller one, was peeking around the other side. And they just kind of stood there and just kind of watched me. I don't think they realized I could see them, but I could see them. They were about 75 yards away. And I finished walking up to my brother, and I Says, hey, I'm not going to motion, but I says, look over to my left and look about 75 yards in, see if you can see it. He was looking, and about that time we heard from over the ridge where the first one had gone, we heard something running down between the ridge and the swamp, and kind of it sounded like a guy, like a man running through the woods. It circled back around and circled over towards where those other ones were, because that's where the sound was going that way. When he looked, he noticed that there was something standing there. I says, yeah, you see how it's got its arm around? And I says, now look over to the other side. He says, look down lower. There's something else over there. And he could make out there was something else standing there, but, he couldn't really, they weren't really distinguishable. I mean, they were just like black. They were just all black. I couldn't really see a face, but I could see that it was covered in hair. And its hair was all black. So I said to him, I says, well, I'm going to leave these apples right down there, and we're going to walk right up the other side of that bowl-shaped area, and then we're going to leave. We're just going to leave these apples and the peanut butter there for them, and then we're going to go, so that way we're not disturbing them, because apparently they're here and they want to, this is their spot. So he says, okay, he agreed, and we walked down into the bowl-shaped area, and I took my knife out and I cut a hole in the sack so that way I could hang it up on a tree about 7 foot up. There's a small maple sapling, and I took out the peanut butter and I started smearing some of it on the branches and some of it on the trunk of the tree using a stick, kind of like the chimpanzees do with they're poking at a log, trying to get out the little worms and whatnot and ants and all. But I went and I smeared that peanut butter on there with that stick real good, and I covered the tree real good, and I left the stick right there, and I took the peanut butter and I loosened the lid so it was barely on, and I stuffed that up there with the apples in the sack, and him and I just kind of sat there for a minute, or stood there, I should say, and we just kind of like thought, well, do you think they'll know that these are for them? And I'm like, well, they ain't for anybody else out here. They ain't nobody else in this woods. And I says, well, let's just leave here and leave real cautious, real slow, and maybe they'll come in and they'll figure out it's for them. So, that's what we started doing. We started walking, up the other side. And when we got to the other side of the bowl-shaped area up right there at the cornfield's edge, there's like a dirt mound there. And I says, look at this. And he's like, oh, wow, and I'm like, there's goose feathers all over and around this on the ground there. Like something had used that as a butcher table to butcher a goose. Like they had just ripped out the feathers and they're all over the place right there. And he's like, yeah, that's pretty cool. So I went and I took pictures of that. And I figured, maybe that it went down to the swamp down there, because there was lots and lots of geese down there. They're always there. And I figured maybe it snuck up and snatched a goose while it was sleeping or something, because the swamp area is like probably about 100 yards away from this spot. And I'm like, maybe it snagged one while it was sleeping and walked up there and used that dirt mound, like a butcher table, and just ripped all the feathers out and got to the meat or whatever it was trying to eat of it. But there was nothing, no skin, no beaks, no parts anywhere, just feathers. And I says, yeah, I think we better get going, now, because it's we've disturbed it, these guys enough, and we'll just kind of ease on out of this woods and cut across the cornfield, because it's already been cut and whatnot. It's spring still, and he hasn't planted new stuff there yet. So we'll go ahead and cut across this, and we'll head back towards the truck. So we went ahead and slipped out the woods, start cutting across, and the whole ordeal, by the time we got back to the truck, took just about an hour and 45 minutes. By the time we left the truck, walked back up in there, kind of looked around, saw what we saw, and, left our apples and peanut butter, and then walked back towards the truck. This is about an hour and 45 minutes total. So, we get back there and both of us are excited. We're both stoked, and, and I'm like, I'm so happy you finally got to, see one. So now I'm not the only one in the family who's seen them. And, you can back me up when we're telling the story. You can back it up so no one will think that I'm the only one and I'm just a crazy guy or whatever. You can chime in and say, yeah, they're real. The Bigfoot that we saw this time, they were smaller than the first one that I had seen when I talked to Vic and, we did the podcast on it. It was probably about 15 foot tall and it had like an auburn colored hair, and I could make out the definition. It was close. It walked right past my tree. But these guys, they kind of were standoffish, and we could still see them, but they were all black. And I think, their faces must have been black, their skin or whatever. They were far enough away from me. I couldn't make out any facial features or anything like that. And I couldn't even begin to tell you what sex they were, but they were smaller than the first one. The two of them were probably about 7-8 foot tall. And then the other smaller one was probably about 4, maybe 5 foot tall, but they kind of kept their distance. So I don't know if maybe they were females or what. I really couldn't tell you. But yeah, that's my second experience with actually seeing Bigfoot in that woods. So that's my story, guys. I hope you enjoyed it.
My Bigfoot sightings happened in Florida. It was 2002, first week in January, and I was leaving work early in the morning after pulling a double, pulling out of Tampa on the Highway 301, and I seen movement to my left. And then I looked and seen a surprise. I seen a gray and silver being to my left, and it had a pink face and eyes that moved with mine where I was going. And it was quite shocking. I looked straight ahead and looked in my rearview mirror again toward the driver's side of the truck, and it wasn't there anymore. I looked in my rearview mirror, it wasn't there, so I looked in the passenger side mirror, and then it was on the other side of the road, and we're talking about a second. And I just couldn't believe what I seen. Like I said, it was about 7 to 8 foot tall, silver and gray, and had longer hair toward the shoulders and chest and his hip area, and it moved very fast. As soon as I went by it, it was from one side of the road to the other, and like I said, about a second. And I don't think that was a human being in it, in a costume. But yeah, that was nerve-wracking. And my second sighting in 2017, the week before Thanksgiving, I was going to Lake Hatchineha in Central Florida early in the morning again, about 6 or 6:15. I was on the last stretch on that road. It was very foggy. And coming over the hill and going down the other side, I looked about a 3/4 of a mile and been on that road many a time. And it looked to me like a cypress tree with moss on top of it, right in the middle of the road, very far away. Like I said, 3/4 of a mile or better. So I was going about 40 because, like I said, it was foggy. My headlights were low, and I keep getting closer to it and put my headlights on bright to see what the heck it was. So at that point, I seen a top of this tree bend down, turn down like where the head would be. and it turned its back to me and dropped into the fog where I couldn't see it no more. And like I said, the fog was probably about 4 feet above the road, 4 to 5 feet. And my lights were shining under the fog. When I turned it bright, this thing went down in the fog, and its hips of this creature was at the top of the fog. So I'm thinking about 10 foot tall. And it was a beast. It was huge. And early in the morning, it's a shocking thing. And I used to like to go out in the woods and camp and hunt, or just walk out on a trail at a state park, county park, or a state forest, and never thought twice of that before 2002. And now, not so much. I got to go with somebody. I use excuse, so it's pretty surprising. It got very real after 2002. And it has changed my life forever. You don't look at things the same.
My Bigfoot sightings have all happened here in central Alabama, where I'm from. And the first one happened when I was, I want to say, about 5 or 6. Basically, how I got to this place was I was at my grandmother's house. My dad, my pawpaw, and my nana had all built me a playhouse, treehouse kind of thing, and I was up on top of it, and I could see, I had a pretty good viewing of what was around me and everything. And I look off to the right on this abandoned property, and I see this really tall, light brown creature just kind of standing there. Like, at the time, I didn't know what it was. And by the time I went and got my nana to come out there and take a look at it, by the time we got back, it was gone. My second one happened not even a year ago. Me and Sarah here, we were coming back from one of my buddy's house late at night, and I just so happened to see up ahead there was this big old sign, a road marker, and I see something just pass in front of it. It's like it was about as big as the sign. It was a big black blob just pass in front of the sign. And I didn't really get a good glimpse of what it was, but I suspect it was a Bigfoot, as big as it was and as fast as it was moving. And I haven't seen anything else around here since then, but it was quite intriguing to me. My first sighting is what pretty much got me interested in Bigfoot and made me want to find the truth about him. And I've got a couple of Bigfoot figures and stuff like that around here, but so far for my sightings, that's all I really have.
My Bigfoot sighting was in Big Stone Gap, Virginia. I was about 4 or 5. It was late at night, and there was a light outside. We were in the trailer, and I was laying in bed, and all I saw was a black brownish figure. I could see glowing red eyes, greenish, you get red eyes, and then it just stared at me through the window. It didn't scare me. I was just had a calm feeling coming over me. And right after it got through looking at me through the window, it just walked away. Ever since that sighting, I've also smelt what smelled like rotten eggs or like a skunk, but something like very bad BO. I've smelled Bigfoot, but I haven't seen him since that first sighting. I've been intrigued by him ever since. Made book reports about him and everything. Watched Finding Bigfoot about him. Been intrigued by him since that first sighting.
Well, that's it for tonight's show. If you've had a Bigfoot sighting and would like to be a guest, please go to mybigfootsighting.com and let us know. Thanks for listening. Have a great night.
Seen a bunch of rundown no-horse towns where the church is the backbone, love's in the plow, and the five-string melodies grooving, with the farmland rows where the roots run deep, beyond the noise of the busy streets, where the songs of the South are soothing. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah.